With that, next I'd like to invite John Choptiany from iDE to share something about the measurement approach that they use.
Thank you very much. My name is John Choptiany. I'm the Vice President of Programs of the technical teams at iDE. iDE is an NGO. We're based in the UK, the US, and Canada, and we have offices in 11 countries. And yeah, okay. It's really hard to see the slides from over here. So maybe. No, it is on. Okay. Thank you. I can see the slide, and hopefully you can as well. So today I'm going to talk about iDE's Market Systems Resilience Index. There are many different tools out there on resilience measurement, and we have one more. And I want to talk a little bit about ours as one example, but also to talk about what this means a little bit in the broader sense of why does it matter. So certainly it matters to understand what you're measuring, what you're working. Is it working at all? Can you measure it before and afterwards? But also, what do you do with that information? So as a smallholder farmer or someone living in a community or a project manager, so what if you have low resilience? What do you do with that? You have a score of 3 out of 5, 7 out of 10. What do I do with that? And we don't have all the answers, but that's something that we're trying to explore. So I'll give one example of this and then talk us through that. Next slide, please. So we look at resilience at the market system level. So what that means is we try to map a system in a market. We look at traditionally focus a lot on farmers, producers, but also the next several levels up. Depends how deep and thick the market is. But the input suppliers, the extension agents, the retailers, and potentially exporters. And we recognize that no one person is an island, and their resilience is largely based on those around them and the whole wider system. So we do look at the individual resilience of each of those actors, but also the larger system as a whole. And we try to look at this so we can understand how to adapt our projects and to improve them over time. So it is really a dynamic system, which is really key. There are lots of tools out there that look at one component, and while that is beneficial, there's only so much you can do with one level of the system. Next slide, please. So there is no way to know what is the perfect measurement of resilience. There is no perfect tool that you can compare this and say this is 98% correct or this other tool is only 50%. We're all trying to make tools and approaches and frameworks more accurate, but there is no perfect to compare that to. So I want to recognize that we don't think that we have it perfect either, but we are continually working to improve this. So we're trying to show a little bit of the network we have here. We've divided resilience into principles. We have structure, connectivity, support, environment, and financial. And then we have 11 determinants. Things look like redundancy, diversity, inclusion, feedback loops, physical environment, financial and viability. And then we break those down further, and then we break those down further into questions, et cetera. So at the end of the day, this is a survey where we try to measure each of those in a qualitative and quantitative way, so that we can get a measurement at scale, both to see individuals, but also trends and patterns between, over time. Because when you go into a community where you're designing a project, you say, okay, yes, we know this community has water scarcity problems. So you design a project around that, and that's great. But if you really delve into the details, maybe it's only the elders that have that problem, or maybe it's only on people on this side of the river or that side of the river, or these types of people. So understanding that nuance can really make a project or interventions or engagement with the government much more nuanced and hopefully much more powerful, because people are very diverse. So it's important to understand that trade-off of qualitative approaches where it's very participatory and engaging, and that can be much richer, but it takes a long time. You can also do high-level resilience where it's very few questions, you're doing it at millions of people, but then you're losing the nuance, the depth. So we haven't cracked that perfectly, but we try to look at somewhere in the middle where we get a little bit of that depth, One of the things we do with this is to combine it with human-centered design. So we'll do this this more quantitative approach with MSRI first, and then we'll find some interesting tidbits of these people have different levels of resilience, and then we'll send in our team of experts who do much more participatory work and engage with focus group discussions, in-depth deep dives, and understand what does it mean to be low resilience in enabling environment or inclusion, and then we try to design our projects from there. Next slide, please. So as I said, we can look at things at different scale. We can give we use MSRI on a scale of 0 to 5. So in this example here, we have overall in the very middle, it's 2.18. What does that mean? It's a way to simplify and aggregate the resilience levels. But you can break it down further into the different components, the principles, and the determinants, and see where there's high levels of resilience and low level of resilience, and then delve into that, and then we can really go into the data much more in depth and have a much greater detail on this. But if you do that at the super hyper local level, it's really hard to say, to compare across areas. So we try to look at things at multiple levels, and particularly looking at, we might see another area that has a very high level of resilience, and that might be interesting. We want to learn why this area has high resilience, and we want to look at areas that have low resilience to see what's not working there. Typically, we want to look at those outliers and see what's the interesting element of that. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick slide to show where we're working in iDE and with MSRI. So we've been using MSRI in these countries, some of them for over 3 years. We're about to start the 4th round. So we are looking at changes over time. One of the big unknowns about resilience is how long it takes to build it. And would you know it once you are quote unquote resilient? So we challenge ourselves to understand how often should you be doing an assessment? Is it every week, every day, every month, every 5 years? How long does it take to build resilience? And can you see changes in resilience over certain periods? So we do try to do it on an annual basis when we can, depending on funding. But that gives us a sense of when a shock happens, what kind of areas of resilience go down and which ones stay the same, and where we can build, and then look across these. So what we're interested in is doing this for ourselves, certainly. We find it very interesting. It helps our programming. But also, we know we don't have a perfect tool. There are many other tools out there. We're very interested in partnering with others, both in the academic sector and other implementing partners, et cetera, to really understand what they're seeing as well, because this is a huge amount of data. Each of the surveys for each individual is around 100 questions. We can skip some depending on the responses. And we do this in the hundreds and thousands. So we have a lot of data points that we can compare, and that's really interesting to mine that data. We certainly don't want to sell that data, but for academic purposes, mining that and understanding where the correlations, where the different elements is really interesting. So I put that out as a sort of open offer that if there are others that want to collaborate and share information, we'd be very happy to do that for the better of all of us. Next slide, please. So I'll just go through an example from Mozambique, where we had a recent MSRI session, and we tried to use MSRI along with other data sets to really look at reflecting on what we were working on and try to pivot and have almost like a midterm evaluation and adapt the project to what we've found so far. So here we say we're combining the MSRI tool with our human-centered design. So we have adaptive management. So what we call it is a pause and reflect section. We had this with USAID, USAID projects, and with our partners. Next slide, please. Over a couple days, we had people reviewing the information from MSRI and elsewhere to really understand what was working and what wasn't, and then redesign the project. Because when you design a project, by the time it gets funded, things have changed. You may not have known the context well enough. By then, the whole thing has changed. So having an opportunity to step back, review what's working, what's not, and then refining the project is really important. That is very difficult based on most timelines of projects and donors, but it's something that we're advocating for, and we try to push where we can because we see it much more valuable. You're never going to get the proposal perfect. So either it wasn't designed perfect, which is usually partly the case, but also the context changes. So what we did is we tried to look at MSRI among other data sources, both qualitative and informal, formal, et cetera. And then reflected, talked about what was working, what wasn't, trying to decide what can we do with this, and then refining our implementation strategy. So this was part of our Feed the Future Resilient Coastal Communities project. It was 2 days, and we refined that. And we do have our chief of party from that project here, if anyone wants to speak with them in more detail about this process. He's that guy over there. Next slide, please. So a couple just quick examples from this pause and reflect session. So just to give you a sense of what kind of things we looked at and found, the team found interesting, because these are just numbers, but at the end of the day, these are people and communities and such. So what we found was we needed to revamp our youth accelerator curriculum and really linking the youth. That was an area that we didn't emphasize strongly enough at first. And working with women fish aggregators to help them with skills training and connect them with other women groups. And trying to make sure that we are working cross-team, cross-thematic areas so that there was better collaboration. Our partners, as often the case at the beginning of a project, may have worked together a little bit, but after a year or two, you start to work together a lot more and then recognize what can work and what not. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, one of the things we are doing, we're continually looking to improve and refine MSRI. As I said, we mostly look at the producer level, so farmers essentially. But we are developing other elements of MSRI, so adapting it to the WASH context, to more micro-enterprise and coastal communities. But one of the areas that I think is really key, and Nate touched on this a little bit, is the so what. So you end up getting one of those scores, and what does that mean for someone who's been assessed as having a 2.18 or a 3.5? Thanks. What do I do with that? They might get the information, but there's the next step, and the traditional answer is, okay, well, we're going to write a proposal, and in maybe 3 or 5 years we'll come back and we'll have funding, and hopefully we'll be able to help you. And that's deeply disappointing for everyone involved. So where possible, we look at trying to change projects, but that's really difficult for project managers, for implementers, for the farmers themselves. If you find out your inclusion resilience level is very low, you might be a market specialist or you might be a gender specialist. What are you supposed to do with that? As a project manager in the field in rural northern Mozambique, you're not an expert in everything. I'm certainly not an expert here. That's very difficult. So what we want to do is build out what we're calling our resilience recommendation table, which is essentially using evidence-based approach to looking at what has worked to build resilience and then tying that to different elements of the resilience from MSRI. So if there's an area that is low, we're trying to build the evidence of what can improve that. Partly from our own resources, as we do this over time, we're starting to build evidence and in at least correlations, if not pure evidence, but also looking elsewhere to try to prepare materials for the project manager so it becomes certainly not automated, because it will need to be adapted to the context, but at least put more tools and information in the hands of these project managers so that they can say, well, maybe it's a farmer field school that would help this the most, or maybe it's a cash transfer or some other activity. But it means that they can have that at their fingertips, not just say, well, okay, what do I do now that I see the financial inclusion is low, help me. But trying to make that a bit more systematic, because when you're talking resilience, you're not talking one little sector. It is the breadth of their livelihood and beyond just the financial aspect, but their home life, their social skills, etc. So that is quite huge. So that's something we're looking at, and we'd love to partner with others. And with that, I think I will close here and say thank you very much. Just really quickly, I would say that the funding is not necessarily the issue. More money is typically better, but what we find is often a challenge is setting out those really detailed implementation plans at the beginning. There needs to be more of a mechanism of refining and adapting that throughout the lifespan of a project. You can't know everything in advance, and also things change. So while more funding is certainly typically better, it's often the rules, and I recognize I used to be on the donor side. There needs to be audits, there needs to be financial safeguards, that all makes sense. But having more of a mechanism to have more adaptation throughout the lifespan of a project, so that as you learn more, you can put money from this bucket or this line into another line. I think that is almost more important as you learn that maybe that's where it should be best used.